Anin Wajia, Bonjour. These are some of the words that we use to greet each other within my indigenous communities in North America. So I was born there in 1951 in the middle of a blizzard, and two teenage parents who had been brought together by custom as opposed to finding each other and knowing that they loved each other. But Mom, who was 18 by that time, had heard in the church in her native language that God answered prayer. And I believe God spoke to her and reminded her of that sermon. And she called out to God and said, "Let my son live and I'll consecrate him to the priesthood." And that night, that blizzard stopped, and the next morning, the plane landed on the lake, the ice lake, covered lake, and there was stuff on board that gave me a healing. And here I am 73 years later, and I'm quite healthy. And so when I look at that, it's a young girl, a teenager, who had lost a child a year before, not born again, couldn't speak English, had never gone to school, not even residential schools, and here she was, God hearing her on the fringes of society. And here I am now as proof of that faith-filled prayer at that point. We could not speak English at that time. We were not educated in that realm. So we came south when I was about 6 years old to a mining community. And during that transition, my dad ended up having a bit of a problem with racism and discrimination, and the fact that this was a new culture was a cultural shock for him. And though he worked hard to provide for us, he ended up having anger issues and ended up drinking quite heavily, and almost every weekend he was in jail. But at one point in time, God appeared to him. Jesus appeared at the foot of his bed, and from that moment on, never drank again, never cursed, never got mad, and eventually in his native language started 10 native-speaking churches in northwestern Ontario that are currently being looked over by my sister, who is also a pastor. So that was a tremendous, miraculous event. And again, God intervened. But unfortunately, I was also part of the problem at that age. I started seeing the situation of our First Nations people, our Indigenous people in North America. And it was in the late 60s. And although I had a confirmation with the Anglican Church, and where I had taken the Bible during those confirmation classes, and the prayer book, and the hymn book, and was so enthralled with it that I was up until about the wee hours of the morning praying and singing and worshiping God. And no one else in the group that was with us experienced that, and the Anglican priest didn't know what to do with it either. So I just confirmed, and they forgot all about me. And at that time, I saw the situation of our people in Canada. And there was the American Indian movement in the United States, where the Indigenous peoples had been fighting for their land and for their rights. But I did join the military at 18 years of age, with the prospect of learning how to defend my people, my own people. But once I was introduced into a different world. At that time, the Canadian Forces were known as a peacekeeping nation of the world. I could not speak to more than 2 people at a time because there was still that anger and bitterness at society. But when I became a Christian, there was one day I took my oldest daughter to Sunday school in the military chapel, and the chaplain just said, "Sir, could you just stay around so that your daughter might not get afraid, and because you're away, she's only 4 years old." And so I went to my wife and I, we both went to the adult Sunday school class, and there the Bible was opened, and all of a sudden I had that same experience I had at my confirmation classes. It's like all of a sudden the Spirit of God came upon me, and I knew I had to get back to it, and all my arguments, all my anger, my bitterness went out the window. As we look at people that don't believe in Jesus, okay, and many of the residential school survivors I speak to are horrified that I would serve Jesus. But many have come to the Lord, and they say the Jesus I learned and experienced on the residential schools was a vengeful, wrathful, destructive Jesus. But now I've accepted Jesus. Now I'm healed, and I find out He's a loving, caring, precious Lord that will guide me and lead me throughout the days of my life. If the Creator wants us to survive and live, He will stop the arrows. The arrows won't be able to stop, no matter whatever it is. But if He wants me to go join Him in the happy hunting grounds today, the arrow will find me. And so that's the way we should be in our Christian walk, is saying, God, I put on the full armor of God. I put on all the protection that You are, but I'm willing to come to You when You call me.